podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to How Are the Podcast. It's Martin here, and we have got a very, very, very special pre-playoff episode of the podcast for you today. And with me to have a bit of a crack about it before we get stuck into it is Chris Wynn. How are you, mate?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I'm very excited about this going out, by the way.
Well, it is a cracker, isn't it? And this is an episode that we recorded a little while ago, and we, for one reason or another, it hasn't seen the light of day until now. But it is an absolutely fantastic story that dates back. Now, this is going to make both of us feel a bit old, isn't it? It dates back, 35 years to 90, well, a little bit longer than that, as we'll find out, to 1990, and all of the circumstances surrounding Swindon Town, as Sunderland, in the second division as it was at the time, were heading towards the playoffs. And we obviously had the playoff game against Newcastle. And we lost against Swindon Town at Wembley, as everybody will remember. But there was obviously an awful lot of things going on behind the scenes at the time. And we caught up with the man who was pretty instrumental in getting all of the revelations about Swindon Town's financial irregularities out in public, didn't we?
Absolutely brilliant. Yep. I think I described him as being the only journalist to have ever got his side promoted in the history of football. From I think where he was working at I think it was the Sunday People or something at the time. But yeah, absolutely incredible story. Yeah, it involves discreet phone calls telling them there was something up, and then fans of certain clubs kind of ringing them at all hours, threatening them, and I mean, just an unbelievable story. And then, as he said, I think, how did he realise where it would all end up? I mean, just an incredible story.
It is indeed. We are, of course, talking about Bill Bradshaw, very famous journal, Sunderland supporter, being on Sky and all sorts of things, hasn't he? So, yeah, we caught up with Bill a few years ago now, but here's the podcast. So, again, the audio quality might not be what you're completely accustomed to from the Roker Report team these days, but it's certainly worth settling down with a cup of tea or something and listening to, because, yeah, it's a roller coaster of a story. And here it is.
And we are privileged to be joined by Bill Bradshaw. Welcome, Bill.
Morning, guys. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us. So the story we'll no doubt go through is a pretty amazing one, but even more incredible how it impacted your own football club. So before we get into the details of that story, how far back does your association with Sunderland Football Club go as a fan?
1962, I can stretch back to in terms of my first match. And my first match was Brian Clough's last. It was a Christmas treat for me to go and watch Sunderland play at Bury. That was my first game, and that was pretty memorable. So I've been following the lads ever since then. And of course, in my case, when you become a journalist, if you're trying to do the job properly, you have to sort of park that in many respects. But tell a Sunderland fan ultimately to park his love of the lads, and you just can't do that, can you? Not really. But it goes an awful long way back. So I was brought up, my heroes were Monty and Charlie Hurley, Jim Baxter, and then of course as a teenager the thrill never surpassed of winning the cup in 73 with what was still for me the best collective side that I've ever seen, because they had a mixture of grit, flair, an incredible determination not to be beaten, which was obviously typified by the final itself. And for many of us who were there, the fifth round in particular against Manchester City was just unbelievable. Great memory. It's all the way back to then, and then as I say, impartiality is supposed to take over when you become a journalist, and it does, in fairness. Although I did once put my fist through the roof of the old Crow's Nest press box at St James's Park and got into awful trouble with Bill McGarry. But, these things happen in the heat of the moment, don't they?
I think we've all been there, especially with Sunderland. Yeah, so I mean, it's amazing that 73 side, how long they took to get promoted, really, how good they were. It was amazing, wasn't it?
Oh, well, it's, yeah, we all love Bob Stokoe, and he had a good association with Arthur Cox, but push me. And although I love him like a brother and all the rest of it, I don't think Bob was necessarily the best manager. He just happened in 72, 73 when he came in to get the best out of that bunch of lads. And after that, he then actually struggled in the job to get a good team promoted. That's the truth of the matter.
Mm. Yeah, it's maybe apt that we'll come on to was maybe I know that him and the players had a big bet on Sunderland winning the cup last season, that season. So maybe it's apt what we'll come on to.
Yes.
But in 1990 you were working at the Sunday People. So I mean, up to this point, I mean, what was your kind of career trajectory up to this point?
Yeah, well, I'd studied journalism at Darlington after I left school, after I left A levels. Rather than go to uni, I decided to go straight into a vocational course at Darlington. My first paper was down in Halifax. I thought I was going to the deep south when I went to Halifax. Little evening paper there. Served me time there for a couple of years, and then came back to the northeast and joined the Evening Chronicle as a news reporter. Couple of years of that, and then I got an opportunity to move into sport on the Journal, the sister paper, and that was marvellous. I was into it then, into what I wanted to do. I was covering Sunderland and Newcastle, week by week. Newcastle one week, Sunderland the next, as we did in the Journal in those days, and did pretty well enough to get noticed, and I got invited to join the Sunday People in the days when they all had Manchester offices. I was in the Manchester office, did that for a couple of years, and then was invited down to Fleet Street. And by 1990, I was a sort of making my mark as an investigative sports news reporter, particularly football, basically trying to break as many transfer stories and anything on the underbelly of football that was going on at the time, and then along came Swindon Town. So I was hitting my stride. I was hitting my sort of straps. All was going well.
Martin raised a good point when we were talking the other day, just about you talking like you're investigative journalist there. It seems to be a bit of a dying art that maybe gone out of fashion, that type of journalist.
Well, I'll tell you what it is. I think that it is to a large extent. There's a few things that have happened. Newspapers have changed. Journalism's changed dramatically. We all know why, but particularly me, being in the business. Social media has changed it. There are very few exclusives anymore, because any whiff of anything, whether it's true or not with social media, and some might say with newspapers, but and it's out there immediately. You've got rolling news. You've had rolling news for some time now, 24/7. The channel that I, did a lot of sort of freelance work with, Sky Sports News, is magnificent, but that's impacted on how newspapers behave. And the other thing that's, of course, it's changed really since the advent of the Premier League in the early 90s is that, unlike the period that we're looking at specifically here, just before the Premier League started, how a football club allows the media access has changed absolutely fundamentally. I pull my hair out in despair at what it must be like for, a young guy as I was then, trying to do a decent job today, because, the days when I was doing this sort of job, I would pick a player up at the training ground, see him in the car park, go to the pub for lunch, have a 1 hour chat with him, just one-on-one. You try doing that to a top flight footballer, or even a League One footballer these days, and it just doesn't happen. It can't. And if you are able to make it happen, then you've done bloody well, because everything is so tightly sellotaped and managed to protect the players from any sort of real world contact. It's frightening, and I'm glad that I was operating in this field as a senior reporter. Obviously went on to become a sports editor, but I'm really glad that I was operating when I was operating, because it was so much fun, and the players were real to you. There was no insulation. There was no media departments. All there was the manager or maybe the club secretary, and that was it.
Bill, did obviously you're working at the people at this point.
Yeah.
Were you given the resources and the time and the scope really to dig deep into stories? You weren't always expected to be producing something, the next day, for the next edition. Were you given the ability to dig deep, to go in depth, and to run long running investigations in the way that it seems these days there's not that much scope within the industry to do?
Well, no, that's a very good point. And remarkably, yes, I was. I don't know if you want to go into the specifics of the Swindon Sunderland story right now, but in general terms, I worked for a fantastic sports editor who also happened to be a Sunderland fan, Neville Holtham. Now, sadly, not with us, but Neville was a Sunderland fan, and his big hero was Len Shackleton, and he got Len Shackleton. Some of you might remember this. He got Len Shackleton really into the Sunday People years ago as the Northeast columnist, and for years Shack was the voice of the people in the Northeast. So we were sort of blood brothers in that, from that point of view, down in London. And if I said to Neville, I want to go and get myself stuck into this, he would largely say, yeah, you can do it, as long as it doesn't affect the rest of your work, which was a challenge in itself. Yeah. But he basically did give me that free rein. But people think about big national newspapers, big Sunday titles, as having, huge staffs. We didn't. In London, there was about 7 or 8 of us in the office, and that included the production staff. It included the boxing correspondent, cricket correspondent. So that it was a tight-knit team, and you couldn't really completely hide away. But in fairness, on this particular story, Neville was skeptical and would say, you're never going to get anywhere with this, but, carry on, knock yourself out, sort of thing. And I did. And it went on for many, many, many months. There was about 10 months of work went on before the first, really gritty story appeared in the paper at all. So it was a long slog, but ultimately rewarding, obviously.
Far cry from having to churn out your 6 or 7 stories every day for the clicks and the hits, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean the guys are now slaves to the keyboards and having to do the social media, blogs, all the rest of it. We didn't have to trouble ourselves with that. Now, I don't think anybody would necessarily say, wish we could turn the clock back, because, you do have an instant feed of some sort, whether it's trustworthy or not, on views, opinions, and let's hope that it is genuine news going on all the time from so many different sources. And the way we operated on the People at this particular time, and at other Sunday newspapers, you would get a story, maybe a breaking story on the Monday, and hope that it wouldn't come out anywhere until the following Sunday.
Wow.
And can you imagine the sweat of doing that now? It was bad enough then. You could work on a story for 4 or 5 days, and it would be set up to be the splash in the Sunday People on the Sunday, and maybe on the Friday or the Saturday it would be in the Telegraph, or it would be in a local paper or whatever. And that was soul destroying. But now, with all the competing social media requirements, the blogs and all the rest of it, so much more difficult these days to keep a story under your hat. So, however, I would have to say that the type of story I was doing, still possible to do that, because I was working in such a closed environment of trusted contacts and secrecy, that it was something else, really. It changed my career, the story, as well, obviously.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've seen stories along the way throughout this season, mainly due to Martin doing a sterling job delving through the archives for us, and even in the local papers, there was kind of stories throughout the whole of the season that Swindon Town are under investigation, and in the main, these stories are revolving around certainly what's being put into the newspapers in the previous months. around the reports of match betting where the management made money on the outcome of Swindon Town's results. We mentioned there was a fourth round FA Cup game against Newcastle where they got beat 5-0 in 1988, where apparently the chairman and Lou McCarry made a lot of money out of it. But at what point, how early on did Swindon come onto your radar?
Yeah, well, these are all familiar things because the stories that I broke. It makes this hairs on the back of my neck still stand up. But it came to my attention around about midwinter of 88, 89. Maybe we're just into January, something like that. But I got a call in the office, and you know, in those days you got a lot of calls like this, and it was somebody saying in slightly hushed, "You ought to have a look at what's going on at Swindon Town, mate." You know, and I said, "Oh yeah." And I'm thinking to myself, why would I want to go and have a look at what's going on at Swindon Town when I'm under pressure to get stories? I'm under pressure to get stories about Arsenal and Manchester United and Liverpool. And I said, yeah, well, you know, what are you talking about? Anyway, it cut relatively well. I won't cut it too short because we've got a bit of time. But the person on the other end of the phone was a Swindon supporter, business person with good links to the club, worked within the club on sponsorship, things like that. And I quickly became aware that this person had the long-term interests of the club at heart, but was heartily sick at the way that it was being run. And in time, more than one person joined in the conversation with me. Got to the point where I took a trip to Wiltshire to check out them in person and to talk about what their fears were. And basically, they said that their club was being run like the Golden Nugget Wild West Saloon. You know, that the things were going on financially, which would blow my socks off. And so then started the period of, you know, can you provide me some proof? Can you provide me some evidence that these things are going on? And it really first manifested itself in a story several months later. And I was able to the chairman of Swindon, who's a local businessman called Brian Hillier, that he had placed a bet on the club to go up in, I think it was 87, 88, something like that, or 86, 87, from the third to the second division. And it was a bet placed as an insurance cover. That's how he explained it, to cover any bonuses that had to be paid out to the players. So knowing that if the team went up, he would have to pay X thousand pounds in those days in promotion bonuses, he thought, well, rather than, you know, risk that having an adverse effect on the club finances, I'll put a bet on my own team to win it, to go up, and which of course is against the letter of the football laws. You don't bet on football. You don't bet on your own team. And I was able to get that story into the papers in July. I think it was July, August, just before the season started. And it was just the first sniff that there might be something going on there. And you know, basically, he admitted he'd done that. And he said that it was, as I say, to cover promotion bonuses. And at that point, I was off and running. My contacts, the people who were helping me on sort of within the club, were saying there's more to come. We'll help you get more. And when that first story went in, my boss said, oh well, see, all this stuff you've been doing, there might be something in it. And that's how it began.
And I mean, because actually those betting allegations of what, I mean, because Lou McCarry ended up moving to West Ham and ended up losing his job at West Ham through.
Yes, I mean, Lou McCarry had built. I have to say, Lou is not on my Christmas card list, and I'm certainly not on his. But Lou had left the club the year before the 89-90 season to go to West Ham, but all the allegations centered on him and his time there with Brian Hillier. Hillier had appointed him in 85, 86, I think it was. And they'd done very well. And the question is, how had they done so well? We'll come on to the irregular payments later on. But this was Lou's regime. He was a very lucky man that the full weight, although he was, sort of censured. He lost his job at West Ham and he was fined for his part in the betting scam. But he was a very lucky man that further action, other than that, there was a jail term, but Lou got off relatively lightly. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're talking about these gambling stories. I mean, at what you talked about people were saying there's definitely more to come. There's more to come. I mean, at what point did that suddenly make a breakthrough from someone placing a few bets into?
Well, I think the first really big story, we've talked about the promotion, covering bonuses bet, but where this story really took off was when my contacts, Hill and Macari, bet against their own team. Not on them, but against their own team, to lose an FA Cup tie. And they told me this probably around about September, just after the season started. And obviously after the initial story about the promotion bonuses story we'd run. And I said, look, if that's true, I said, that is a sensational story. A football chairman and manager betting against their own team. I said, but I can't go anywhere near that. Cannot go anywhere near it without evidence. And they said, well, we'll see what we can do. And for weeks, I was going to come up with something, and they were trying and said, I don't think we can do this, and I'm not sure that there is any actual hard evidence. And I said, well, obviously it's difficult. They placed a bet, and I knew the amounts. I knew they'd bet £6,500. It doesn't sound like the tastiest bet in the world, but £6,500 for Swindon to lose at Newcastle. Now, Newcastle at the time were a struggling first division team. Swindon were doing quite nicely in the second division. So you could regard it as a sort of game where Swindon might fancy themselves in the third round of the cup at Newcastle. But they placed that bet for Swindon to lose, and boy, did they lose!
It's 5-0.
And so Hillier picked up his winnings. But how could I prove that? How could I put that in the newspaper? And then, lo and behold, beginning of November, end of October, something like that, they came to me and said, look, we think we've got it for you. And I said, what have you got? And they said, we've got a copy of the check, the winning check. I said, you little beauty. And I didn't want to trust anything. I didn't want to trust in those days of facts or anything like that. So I drove from London to Swindon, picked up the photocopy of the check, which was for nearly $5,000, and there it was, paid out to Brian Hillier. And very next Sunday we ran the story, and the whole football world then stood up and took notice, because for people in that position to be betting on their own team to lose, well, I don't need to tell you chaps or any football supporter what that means. It puts the whole integrity of that particular game, the result and all the rest of it, under scrutiny. Even if the players didn't know about it, I don't know if they did or they didn't. I presume they didn't, actually. But it throws a very unfair spotlight on the team. But what it does undoubtedly do is paint the central characters, Macari, and as complete scoundrels. What were they doing? What were they thinking? What were they possibly thinking of? So we ran that. That was in early November of '89. And from my point of view as a story, I was off and running, and I was not going to let it go. The FA then launched an investigation by early January following my story in the People. There had been action taken. Hillier was banned from football for 6 months. Macari was fined £1,000 for his part in it. And Hillier then appealed against his 6-month ban, and the FA, showing great, let's call a spade, showing balls for once, for his temerity in making an appeal, increased it to 3 years. So that effectively finished Brian Hillier. But in the background, there was more to come, and I was working on the next phase.
So were you working with the authorities at that point, with the FA kind of asking you the question?
Well, we I never, and I don't think any journalist particularly works with the authorities. But when you do a story like that, you know that if you've got it right and if there's some substance to the story, the authorities will come knocking. And as soon as they come knocking, then yes, I then cooperated with them. They wanted to know my evidence, how I'd got this without ever compromising the identity of my contact, which they accepted. But any questions that Glenn Curtin at the FA and anybody else had at that point over the betting story, I was happy to cooperate, and I did. With the people cooperated fully with them.
And I mean, as we've worked through pretty much the last third of the season, I would say that it's been kind of obvious from the stories that Martin's pulled out from us that even though you said there that the FA made a quick decision on that kind of original kind of allegation and that original
the betting story,
that I mean the story that you broke after, they seem to be kind of burying their head in the sand a little bit with that one. But how did the story keep developing into something kind of even more serious for the club?
Yeah, well, after the betting story was done, and I think that Swindon thought that they'd escaped and that was it. There was nothing more to come. But my contacts were telling me that Swindon were basically building their team, and it was a pretty good team, Swindon's team, as Sunderland found out, of course, at Wembley. They were building their team illegally, or I remember at the time my lawyers at the Sunday People kept on saying, "Don't use illegal, call it irregular." So legal. So let's call it irregular. They were building their team nefariously in an irregular fashion by cheating the system. Now, we'll come on to the tax element of this, but from a football point of view, and I think this gets overlooked at times, what Swindon were doing, and this is what I was being told by my contacts, they were basically building a team on the cheap, and therefore cheating all the other teams in these, the second tier, the second division, and before that, in fact, when they were in the third division as well, and probably the fourth for that matter, because they came up quite quickly. But what they would do is they would find a player that they wanted to sign. Let's call him Player X. They've targeted at him. They've said, right, let's make him an offer. We won't go to the club, but we'll go to the player and say we're going to offer him the numbers from back in the day. We've got 500 quid a week. But what we'll do is we'll offer him 300 on his contract, 200 under the counter, or what they used to call side payments. And so they wouldn't make an offer to the club. They would say, right, we want him, but we're going to take it to the old tribunal. Remember the tribunal system?
Yeah.
So they would take it to a tribunal system, say we can't agree a deal with his parent club, but we want him. We think he's worth 300 quid a week. And then they would then use the old multiplier system, the tribunal, which was how much are the buying club prepared to pay him? What is his age? What is his experience? Blah, 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 blah. Now, if they're only offering him £300 a week on the official contract, the tribunal might say, right, player X is worth, again, remembering the values of the day, 250 grand or 150 grand. If they'd said they were paying him 500 quid a week, that price would have probably gone up to 400 grand. So they were cheating the system and cheating the teams around them by under-declaring on the official contracts that went to the Football League and the Inland Revenue, of course. They were cheating the system by undervaluing the amount they were paying to the players. Player X didn't care because at the end of the week, he got his £300 a week from the club in his pay packet. And he also got in cash, not declared to anybody, not to the Football League, certainly not to the tribunal and not to the taxman. He'd get his 200 quid in cash. And so they were cheating the system pretty comprehensively and building, a very good squad of players, which included the likes of, if you look at the team that played Sunderland, the likes of, Digby in goal, quality goalkeeper, David Kersley, Steve White, a very good sort of journeyman striker, certainly very good in that league, Duncan Shearer. The quality of those players, but the whole team was put together in terms of the transfer market by fiddling, essentially, and that is what my contact knew was going on. The players, certainly, in terms of not wanting to brand the players earlier on about the cup bet, this is different. The players knew that was going on because they were receiving these payments both officially through the pay packets but the unofficial ones as well, the side payments, the side contracts, which were completely illegal. And that's what was going on. That's what I was working on. And the third phase of the story came out February, I think it was, as the season was really getting into its stride. And when that came out, that Swindon were making irregular brackets illegal, folks, closed brackets, payments to their players. That was even more explosive. Not maybe quite as sexy as the betting story, but long-term, far more explosive. And it wasn't just one story I then did. I was more or less putting in some sort of story every week or every other week from then until, the story reached its peak in the football courts and then in the criminal courts as well.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
So, Bill, at the time when you've got this story running and Swindon are up there in the league, are you hoping that they finish in one of the top positions, so it becomes even more of a story, or how are you kind of feeling about?
I'll be honest about it. I wasn't really hoping to be in any way or planning to be any way vindictive towards Swindon in terms of their final position or the result. What I wanted in terms of justifying the stuff was for the football authorities to take action against the people at the centre of this, which was the chairman and the manager. And of course, it wasn't the current manager. It wasn't Ozzy Ardiles. It was the previous manager. But funnily enough, before the story reached its peak, I mentioned before that Macari had been fined for his part in the cup bet story. He had decided to appeal, as Hillier had. Hillier got his ban from football increased to 3 years. When Macari decided to appeal, West Ham were having none of it. West Ham, particularly at that time, were a very proper club. They were very well run, and they decided they wanted nothing to do with Macari if he was going to, if you like, drag their name through the mud by appealing against this FA decision to fine him. So I had, if you like, a bit of a scalp with Hillier being banned from football and Macari being found guilty. But then I must admit, I was quietly quite satisfied, quite chuffed when West Ham forced him to resign as well, because that again, from my point of view, vindicated the story. In terms of what happened in the league, that hadn't really crossed my mind at the time. But of course, once it became apparent that there were candidates for promotion, and I knew that this irregular payment story was going to put them in the football dock. I thought this could be interesting. Where's this going? Where's this going to go, folks? And even then, I could have no idea. I could have no idea that it would end up having a massive impact on Sunderland, but also a bit of an impact on Newcastle as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just on that point, I mean, before the season even ends, there was originally going to be a hearing which was scheduled to discuss the 36 in the end serious allegations of fraud, but that was supposed to happen in the April, and that was postponed. I mean, I'm assuming you were going to cover that, but it wasn't really explained why that was postponed. Was that an attempt by the FA to basically get themselves out of making a decision to see how the league panned out?
Going back to how I was thinking at the time, I might have thought that, but I think it became clear that, or at least this is what the FA said, that because at the time Swindon were planning to take High Court action, they decided to wait until that had played out, if indeed they did proceed with it. And the other thing, of course, was I think they had one eye on the fact that at that particular time, you're getting into early May, that Swindon could be involved in an extended season in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they thought, let's just hold our horses. But it just, of course, had the effect of increasing the tension.
Yeah, exactly. So that was spilling into the playoffs. But let's come back to the football for a second. Last day of the season, Sunderland get beat at home to Oldham Athletic. Newcastle are thumped at Middlesbrough, which means we face Newcastle in the semi-final of the playoffs. I mean, Bill, was there a lot of interest that we were going to face Newcastle in the semi-final playoffs from a national perspective, especially because it was only the 4th year of the playoffs being in existence, and it was the first finals to be played at Wembley as well.
That's right. Oh, there was. I mean, you have to remember to put this into context. Football was in a pretty dark place in this period that we're talking about. You know, it's just a year after Hillsborough, it's the Taylor Report, you know, at the All-Seater Stadium. It's at the cusp of the modern era, this. You know, the Premier League was just a year or two away, but football was in a dark place, and you look at the attendances. I know that the football grounds, the security came into this with a limited capacities, but there were 30,000 at Newcastle and 26,000 at Sunderland, something like that. And there was interest, but I'll tell you what, I would say a reasonable amount of interest nationally, but in the Sunday People office with the Sunderland supporting sports editor and Neville and me, there was massive interest, absolutely huge interest. But no, the playoffs were still very much a novelty, weren't they, at this point? And of course, the other thing that's on the horizon is Italia '90. So there was all that going on as well. But this was Newcastle and Sunderland, the two sleeping giants meeting in what was a massive match. So yeah, of course there was some interest, but from my point of view, absolutely, you know, and my office, massive interest. You know, we were Sunderland exiles in the capital. And
I mean, with what you knew, we've gone through all of that investigation. We've gone right up to where it's at the end of the season. I mean, did you actually have it in your mind when it came out and the season ended, the league placings, we were playing Newcastle, we'd finished 6th, they'd finished 3rd, Swindon was sandwiched in the middle with Blackburn, that there was a possibility that the winner of the two legs between Sunderland and Newcastle could end up being the ones that went up if Swindon didn't.
At that point, when we got to the semi-final matches, I thought Sunderland could possibly be the beneficiary here if they get to Wembley and don't win, they might still end up winning. I did begin to. I can't bloody believe this. You know, I started this story, you know, 18 months ago, thinking, what am I doing investigating Little Swindon? And here we are. And I could be the architect of Sunderland coming out smelling of roses. I did begin to think that, but I thought, I put it at the back of my mind because I thought, hey, you can't make this up. This stuff like this just doesn't happen. This isn't going to happen. This isn't going to happen. And of course, we know how it played out, and I'm still waiting for Bob Murray to buy me a drink. You know?
I think you'd be waiting a while. I mean, I think the FA, to be fair, I think they let out a collective sigh of relief as they avoided the logistics of having Sunderland and Newcastle fans descending on London to face each other for the first year that they'd moved to the flagship playoff finals at Wembley.
Yeah,
that would have been incredible.
I'm sure that's right. I mean, I think that, but in some respects, you know, I don't know what you lads think. I mean, obviously, I was down in London at the time, but I just thought that the way that it played out with the two legs and the way that Sunderland then eventually won it on sort of away turf at, you know, on Tyneside was just remarkable. In many ways, it was better than beating them at Wembley in some respects because the tension over the two legs was just remarkable.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Brown wrote something interesting about that we ended up in the semi-final. He said he wrote to have both sets of supporters meet at every motorway cafe down the M1 and King's Cross before cramming the whole lot on the tube and spewing them out of Wembley Park would have completely scuppered any hopes of finding favour with UEFA.
Yes,
which is probably about right. I mean, but was there any almost disappointment within kind of maybe the world of football reporters that wasn't a possibility? Because that would have been a day of reporting, to be fair, wouldn't it?
It would have been unbelievable. But you know, Jeff's got a point. God, that would have been absolute total mayhem. You know, from Washington Berkeley services all the way down to the M25. It would have
Battle of Wetherby.
Oh, it would have been total chaos, wouldn't it? It would have been. Yeah, I dread to think of it. Well, how will it go? You know what? When one or the other team gets to Wembley, the chaos of how we're going to get there on the train, are there running specials? You know, is the platform long enough? Can you imagine if it if you had two teams doing that, I mean,
Well, I guess they will have had the experience to a certain extent of having obviously Liverpool and Everton fighting out FA Cup finals and stuff over the 80s. But it's not the same. They're all in the same families, aren't they? You know, it's
I think there was a few headaches at the FA.
they had their share of headaches. But just looking back, if I can briefly go back to the story and just skipping back to Macquarie, I had to confront Macquarie before we printed the story about the irregular payments. I was instructed by the lawyer that I stand in front of him and put the allegations to him to give him a chance to comment. And, you know, he knew all about me by this time. And I actually managed to do it I think it was in the February when West Ham played at Plymouth. And I managed to find out where the West Ham team was staying, and I secreted myself in the reception area. And I knew that Macquarie was about to come down into the reception area from his room, and my heart was jumping out of my chest. And he came out the lift, and I went to him, and I basically said, "We're doing this tomorrow, Lou. XYZ, what have you got to say?" And he didn't need to say anything. I just had to give him the opportunity to say it. And he looked at me and he just said, "No comment." And that was it. That was all I had to do. And once I'd got that, and it was in the paper, the big story about the irregular payments was off and running. And as we know, it then played out its way into the football courts and the criminal courts after that.
Did you get any reaction from any of the Swindon players who might have, been involved in some of these transfers, or anyone associated with them? Was there stuff kind of coming to you on the back of the stories that you were breaking?
Yeah, well, I did actually doorstep, to use the old journalism parlance. I did doorstep a couple of the players who, I'd mentioned in passing. I won't go into it now because I don't think it's fair, but I did actually stand on their doorsteps and say, "What do you say about this?" And they were fine, actually. They knew I was doing my job, and they didn't really commit to saying anything apart from, more or less what Lou had said, no comment. But they were okay. They weren't pleased to see me, but they knew I was doing my job. I have to say that years later, although he'd left the club the year before, and his name had cropped up, Chris Kamara, who I of course later bumped into regularly in Sky Sports on Sunday mornings. He'd be going through his goals on Sunday tapes, and I'd be preparing for Sunday supplement or whatever. And he always used to have a bit of a laugh with me about it, because I'm sure I gave him a few headaches at the time because his name was part of this story. And he used to say, "Oh, Bill, you gave me sleepless nights." But Chris is a good sport about that. But my wife at the time was pregnant, and I was frequently woken up that winter in the middle of the night with phone calls saying that I was going to be kneecapped, and I regularly found myself being trailed from the office back to my home by a guy in a Mercedes, and it was quite frightening. There were some. It was intimidation, and I was never really afraid that anything would happen, but it was intimidating because I knew what was going on, and the sort of calls in the middle of the night saying that the Quality Street gang was after me and all this sort of stuff. It was remarkable.
I don't know whether that's the lengths a journalist will go to, or the lengths a Sunderland fan will go to get that.
Yeah, I was. I had my teeth. I had my teeth into it by then, fellas. Yeah, I wasn't going to stop for anything like that. Yeah.
Well, quickly going back to the epic, the two-leg semi-final, and we'll go into the first leg. And as always with Sunderland, it seems to always happen. There was controversy with how the tickets for the first leg were sold. You'll all be surprised to hear. There was criticism at the decision to sell tickets to those who were able to collect a voucher at the final league game of the season against Oldham, ahead of those with the club membership. I wonder if any of this sounds familiar, lads.
But I remember the vouchers. I remember getting the vouchers going into the ground in that game, and I'm sure me and my dad were I remember being really nervous that we wouldn't actually be handed a voucher going in, because we really wanted to get to the semi, whenever it would be, and so that was quite a big thing as an 8-year-old, we'd heard about these vouchers, make sure you get them. I'm sure, there was never any chance of us not, but it was like, your Willy Wonka's golden ticket, really, is how it felt as a kid.
You held it in your hand.
Yeah.
92 cup
Yes.
final. We had 3 home games in about the space of a week, and you had to have vouchers from all 3 games to get to the front of the queue for it was either a semi ticket or a final ticket. But yeah, you had to have all 3 vouchers. So he certainly wasn't afraid of using the technique of encouraging supporters to come to the game.
Yeah, Sunderland have always been pretty awful at sorting tickets out for big games. So the bookmakers make Newcastle 2-1 favourites as they prepared for the semi-final by flying out to Ireland to train. They were 2-1 favourites to go through and win the playoffs, with Swindon at 5-2, Blackburn were 11-4, and we were the rank outsiders at 7-2. But we did seem to get the upper hand over Newcastle in the 2 league games. I mean, tying away a derby is absolutely huge, but can anybody just imagine this scenario played out in the current day? Just incredible. I can't imagine, every single second on social media would be covered by it. I mean, it would just be incredible, the build-up in the modern day.
No, but if you transfer it to, the 21st century, it would be immense, wouldn't it? As you said, social media would be all over it, as well as the regular media. But I'm sure, we all remember what was going on 30 years ago. I think that it was pretty heavy duty even then, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Very, very quickly, just a change of direction quickly, because before we go into that first leg at Roker Park, I want to quickly cover the epic FA Cup final the day before our first leg. So this was the 12th of May 1990. I want to mention it because it's the first memory of sitting with my dad watching an FA Cup final. Early memories. It was Crystal Palace versus Manchester United, of course, and it ended 2-2 in normal time. Then Ian Wright put Palace ahead in extra time before Mark Hughes equalised for Manchester United with 7 minutes of extra time remaining. Any memories of that game? 3-3 epic.
It was a cracking game, wasn't it?
It was.
I remember Wright coming on and getting the goals. I think Jim Leighton, Alex Ferguson held Jim Leighton responsible for a couple of the Palace goals, and he was dropped for the replay, wasn't he?
Yeah, I'll mention the replay during the playoffs. But here's our trivia for the day. I think we'll probably mention already that Ian Wright scored 2 of Crystal Palace's goals, but can you remember who got the other one for Palace?
Ooh. Was it Pardew?
Gary O'Reilly.
It was. Wow, what a shout.
Good shout.
You should never ever go up against Martin in terms of trivia from the late 80s, early 90s. Should know better by now.
I will say, though, chaps, that was the game that Ian Wright really announced the football world as a serious striker, and what a fine player. He already was then, but he really did come on to be a fantastic striker, and survived all the way through to the beginning of the Wenger era at Arsenal, and great player, and he was magnificent. His infectious smile, when he scored as well, just that was fantastic. I remember Leighton as well. He had a very unfortunate game, but of course that was in a sense, those 2 games, the final and the replay, was the way that Alex Ferguson got Manchester United chugging, then running, then racing ahead into the modern era. That saved his bacon at United, that match.
It really did, didn't it?
Yeah. We touched on Mark Robbins' goal in the 3rd round against Nottingham Forest this season as well. Huge goals. But yeah, anyway, back to the huge game at Roker Park the next day. Big team news in the days leading up to the 12 noon kickoff of the first leg. In terms of Newcastle, the big worry was Mickey Quinn's knee injury that forced him to miss the 4-1 defeat to Middlesbrough on the last day of the season. That would rule him out, but is likely to be ruled out if at all possible. So Newcastle are worried about that. And in terms of Sunderland, it looks like it's too soon for Colin Pascoe, has been out for a month and is going to miss out. But the reports are that Gary Bennett will make the game and come back in for Michael Heathcote. Viv Busby said when he's on his game, he's probably one of the best centre-halves in the country. Now, maybe slightly over the top from Viv Busby, and we've heard Gary Bennett was linked with first division clubs along the way, like Crystal Palace throughout the season. I mean, Bill, we've talked a lot in previous parts about how much Gary Bennett loved to go forward, and we've had a bit of a laugh about it in watching some of the highlights. But how good a defender was he in your opinion, Bill?
I think Gary, particularly at second tier level, was absolutely out of the top draw at that level. He was. I think he was fantastic. And in fairness, a shout out for John McPhail as well. McPhail, more than once in recent years, I've thought to myself watching, the modern Sunderland side. I've thought what we could do with a John McPhail now. No nonsense stopper. But Gary Bennett was a footballer. You smile when you say that about, bringing the ball out from the back and all the rest of it. But Gary Bennett was a very, very good second tier defender, and certainly good enough to get by in the top flight as well. He could operate in First Division stroke Premier League. But at that level, you wouldn't go past him. I wouldn't have thought. He was brilliant.
Really good defender. I mean, amazingly, the day before the game, Sunday the 13th of May, there were still tickets available to members only, which we'll come back to. I mean, just out of interest, Bill, where were you the day of the game? Did you ask to cover it, or were you down in London?
I didn't ask to cover it because that would have taken the job away from our northern lads. That would have been a little bit precious of me. I could have gone up as a fan, but I think from memory that I was in the middle of incredible goings on in the Sunday People office, because without getting into office politics that you don't want to hear, but Robert Maxwell was the owner of the Mirror Group, which the People was part of, and he basically decided to axe or kill off everybody over 60 at that point, which included my boss at the time. And because I was doing pretty damn well, with this story and other things going on, I was asked to take over as sports editor. So my hands were somewhat tied by increased responsibilities in the office, but I was following it very closely from afar, shall we say.
And Rich, did you say, I can't remember, did you say this was your first derby?
I was at this. This was my first derby. And didn't go to another one until I think the last time we played Newcastle. I think if it hadn't been a lunchtime kickoff, I'm not sure I would have been allowed to go, to be honest, if people had, as we've talked about a couple of times on here, I think parents were a little bit risk averse at this point, given what had happened, as Bill mentioned, with Hillsborough and all the trouble at grounds. I think the lunchtime kickoff did have a bit of an influence on me being allowed to go to this one. It wasn't allowed to go to the next leg, to be frank.
No, probably a good job as well. And yeah, let's go into the teams. The Sunderland team, the only change from the defeat against Oldham on the last day of the season, with Gary Bennett coming back in for Michael Heathcote. So just very quickly, it was Tony Norman in goal. Then we've got John Kay, Paul Hardyman, Gary Bennett, and John McPhail at the back. Midfield, we've got, I said Paul Hardyman at the back. It was actually Ruben Agboola. In midfield, we had Gary Hours, Gordon Armstrong, Paul Bracewell, and Paul Hardyman on the left. And then up front, of course, it was Eric Yates and Gabardini. And on the bench, Kieran Brady took a place on the bench for this one, sitting next to a regular sight on the bench, which was Thomas Hauser, of course. And let's take a quick look at the Newcastle side. John Burridge, Kevin Scott, Mark Stimson, Roy Aitken, John Anderson, Ray Ranson, Kevin Brock, Billy Askew, Mickey Quinn, Mark McGee, Bjorn Christensen. And on the bench, they had Liam O'Brien and Kevin Dillon. So obviously Mick Quinn and Mark McGee were the most prolific partnership in Division 2 by some distance. I think they almost had 50 goals between them at the end of the season. So incredible partnership they had. Just a quick tip, according to reports, moments before the kickoff, the cameras were aimed at the main stand seats, as at this point it was only John Hall made his first appearance as owner of Newcastle after wresting control of the club, apparently from Gordon McKeag after his 2-year battle for power, which I want to come back onto when we discuss the Football Association in a bit. Let's get on to the game itself. 4 shots on target and 38 fouls in 90 minutes. Pretty much tells the story of this game. But from the few highlights that are available, I mean, Rich, I'll comment to you. I don't know if you've seen it, but the pace and commitment of this game just looked like something else in those highlights.
Intense game. Obviously, loads of yellow cards. And tight like all of the games between Sunderland and Newcastle in this season. There was not very much between the two sides. And yeah, it wasn't exactly action packed in front of goal, but yeah, definitely lots of commitment shown across the park. To be honest,
it was like pinball with lots of things.
Yeah.
And it remained goalless until the very last minute, when Newcastle have a chance. Mark McGee has an opportunity after touching it past Tony Norman, only to have his shot blocked by a saving tackle from Gary Bennett, who was the last man. Great last-ditch tackle. And then we break. Ball played down the line by Hardiman. Mark Gabardini fouled in the box. And look, I wouldn't have said it then, but looking back now, that's not a penalty, is it? He's been watching his partner Eric Gates, I think, a bit too much during the season, fall over it every give it. I mean, it was a clumsy tackle, but I suppose you could say.
I might be wrong, but wasn't George Courtney the ref for that first?
It was Vic Callow.
Yeah. Oh, it was Vic Callow. Did Courtney do the other one?
Yes, yeah.
Yes,
we'll definitely come back onto George Courtney.
Yeah,
he's definitely a character in this.
George, obviously a local fella, but he liked the spotlight. He liked to make the story himself, I think, a little bit.
Yeah. And we get this penalty, and Hardiman's missed one or two during the season, but he was a good penalty taker. But I mean, Martin, we've probably said it before, but it shows what pressure can do.
Well, it does. But I think when we've gone through this season, I think Hardiman took over the penalty responsibilities after Marco had missed a few the season before, and he took over from MacPhail, who'd missed a few. And in the last home game before this game, or the last game of the season, Hardiman had missed one. So, it took some balls for him to stand up to take it in the last minute, I think. I think he probably missed 2 or 3 out of his last 4 or 5. So, I think, credit to him for standing up to take it. But we all know what happened. He did, when he struck it, it stayed hit. The Paul Hardiman penalties I remember rocketed into his top left hand corner, the goalkeeper's top right, and there's no chance. But this one he didn't quite get hold of.
Well, yeah, and I'm not advocating violence, but if you're going to redeem yourself from missing a penalty against Newcastle, one of the options, I suppose, is to try and put the keeper into the stand, which is what Paul Hardiman tried to do by after John Burridge had hold of the ball for about 3 or 4 seconds. He sprinted up to him and probably kicked John Burridge harder than he actually kicked his penalty. Unfortunately,
desperate hope that Burridge would fumble it, would you, if you give him the benefit of the doubt?
I mean, you were a kid at the time, Rich, but I mean, as a kid, I mean, I think a lot of people thought we'd blown it, but were you walking out gutted at that result?
I think, yeah, with obviously having that chance right at the end, it did feel like maybe our best opportunity had passed us by. Obviously, we'd had the opportunity to make up for it in the next game, but I wasn't feeling amazing at that point, because that chance had gone and the drama around that last minute or two of the match, when you're 8, obviously it's quite overwhelming, I think. But I think walking away from the Roker end towards Milanas was not the best feeling in the world that afternoon. But there was a lot going on in football around that time. As you say, there was the FA Cup, which hadn't been concluded. There was Italian 90 coming up. And I just remember it being like the most exciting period to be a kid to be getting into football, with all of what was going on with, a two-legged semi-final, a cup replay, a World Cup on the horizon. It did seem like you were a little bit at the centre of the world of football at that time. So I think I was still hopeful. We're going back 30 years here. I'm not quite sure I can remember absolutely everything I was feeling when I was 8 years old, but I do have this impression in my mind of my dad having his arm around me going, this is what it's like, son. And he was absolutely right. This is what it's like. It's not going to get any easier, lads.
When you hear all of the players talk about the aftermath of the game, the Sunderland players talk about the Newcastle players celebrating as if they got to Wembley in the dressing room afterwards. So that probably gave our lads a little bit between the teeth for the second leg.
I have to say that from a slightly afar, from looking at it from London, I wasn't that despondent. Maybe I should have been, but I wasn't that despondent by the result because, in my sort of judgment, looking at it, there were two sort of so-so teams. Sunderland improving from where we'd been a few years earlier, in the third division, under Dennis Smith, definitely improving, but still not really a very good team. Newcastle significantly weaker than where they'd been a couple of years earlier. No Beardsley, no Waddle, no Gascoigne. They'd lost all of those in the immediate past couple of years. And as you've just said, this was the sort of birth, this period of the John Hall era. So I thought that Sunderland had a goodish chance of going through, even though they'd finished, 3 places and 6 points worse off during the regular season.
Yeah. Rich, you mentioned it was tight. I mean, 8 of the last 9 derbies, including this one, were drawn between the two sides. So maybe not a surprise that this one was a draw. What was a surprise maybe was the crowd was only 26,641, which was the lowest crowd for a town-and-away derby since the war, and obviously lower than that derby earlier in the season, which was 29,000 at Roker Park. So maybe kind of stories maybe of trouble keeping people away.
So blame the vouchers. Blame the vouchers.
Yeah. So that game was on the Sunday, as we said, and the second leg was on the Wednesday. Reports, obviously, as I said, all said we'd blown it in the papers. All of the predictions were now that Newcastle were going to go through, but Dennis Smith was emphasising how much of the pressure was on Newcastle. I mean, I was lucky enough to interview Dennis Smith, and I spoke to him about this, and he said that essentially all he had to do was make the players believe that they could win the game, because he knew, as you said, Bill, there wasn't much between the two sides.
No.
It was just going. It was basically just going to St James's and believing we could win. But I mean, it shows how much things have changed. When in today's game, we couldn't, we wouldn't give this a second thought that it would be live on the television. But I remember listening to this on the radio, and the family also had teletext on at the same time. We had it was almost like a
new technology, guys.
Yeah, it was almost like a VAR, second check, to make sure that the radio was telling us the right story. So I mean, as we said, all the talk ahead of the second leg in terms of the Sunderland team was who was going to replace Paul Hardiman on the left of midfield. It was too soon for Colin Pascoe, so that meant it was one from Kieran Brady, Brian Atkinson and Warren Hawke. I mean, we've talked many occasions on how good Kieran Brady was at times during this season. Brian Atkinson won Barclays Young Eagle Awards and all of that. And I don't think we've mentioned Warren Hawke since the opening day of the season when he scored at Swindon Town, funnily enough. But in the end, it was Warren Hawke who got the nod for only his second start of the season. I mean, Bill, that's an amazing decision from Dennis Smith when you look back.
That is a huge shout, I have to say, yes. Well, if you've spoken to Dennis about that, he probably told you why he did. But presumably he'd seen something in training, or there was something in the kid's demeanour that he thought for this one-off match he's the right man for the job. But it is on the face of it a massive call to bring him in for that second leg.
Yeah, I did actually. I asked him that exact question, funnily enough, and he said in his mind, he said what he wanted at St James's was essentially energy and the legs basically, and he thought Warren Hawke would give him the work rate defensively, but an absolutely huge call still. I mean, even based on that, he said he basically talked to Warren Hawke and said, "Do you fancy it?" And he said, "Yep." And that was pretty much it. As if a footballer's going to turn that down. So yeah, I mean, Wednesday, 16th of May, 1990, a date ingrained on all of Sunderland fans' minds. The day of days is upon us. Just very quickly, what I wanted to do was I've actually got the Newcastle programme, and there's Gordon McKeague writes a couple of things which is quite interesting. He does a piece in there, and he said, "I've been approached by a number of supporters who feel aggrieved that we face this sudden death situation after finishing several points clear of our rivals." No bitterness there then at all. He also says, which we'll come on to, but he also says, "Our supporters have a big part to play tonight by roaring on the team and staying off the pitch." the behaviour of football fans is under the microscope again, and I hope our followers will show the sensible face of the game tonight. So there you go. That's some interesting words from the Newcastle chairman there. So we'll get into the starting 11. And as I said, the only change in the starting 11 from Sunderland's point of view was Warren Hawke coming in for Paul Hardiman. But amazingly on the bench, we mentioned Kieran Brady was on the bench for the first leg. Bizarrely, because Warren Hawke comes in and he's only for his second start of the season, Kieran Brady's replaced by Michael Heathcote on the bench, which again seems, since Smith was taking a gamble on Warren Hawke on the left, surely you would have a backup for someone making their second start of the season.
You know, we've been going through the team sheets all season, and I was expecting there to be, you know, options on the bench. I'm not sure options on the bench was how the bench was selected. You know, we have picked up this a couple of times, like in the first leg, having Kieran Brady and Thomas Hauser on the bench. That's two forwards. I mean, you would have wondered what would have happened if we got a couple of injuries at the back during that game. Well, yeah,
Vaughan Hardiman could swap back in the full back, couldn't he? But for this game, you don't have that. You've got a centre forward playing on the left wing. So you need a defender on there. And as Chris mentioned, like Benno was a doubt coming in the first leg, so presumably he's a doubt for this game, or carrying some injury. So it kind of makes sense. I must admit, I would have chosen Kieran ahead of Thomas Hauser on the bench, but there you
go. yeah. Goal machine, don't forget.
I would think, fellas, that's a good point just being made, that probably it was cover for Bennett. In case he was still feeling it, you know.
And of course, I mean, moving closer to the summer months, we're in 16th of May in the northeast, so of course it's raining. And looking
incredible turnaround as well. Quick turnaround, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it's just 3 days basically, from one match to the next.
Yeah, and actually looking at the game highlights and the pitch, I mean, actually, if maybe it wasn't such a big game, there might have been doubts that this game would have went ahead, because I'm not sure if the ball actually rolled in the centre circle. It was just a mud bath. But yeah, imagine being a derby. I remember one with Terry Butcher where it was waterlogged and they couldn't call it off around 93, 94. It was like a swimming pool they were playing in. But yeah, I mean,
head, wasn't it?
yeah, but that was and the Newcastle team. They only make one change. Darren Bradshaw comes in for Ray Ranson, and then we get into the game. First 10 minutes, we have a scare when Mark McGee hits the post, but then on 13 minutes, a goal from nowhere. John Kay throw in from the halfway line down the line. Marco loops it over his head to find Gary Hours on one of his trademark runs that wasn't picked up, and he kind of scissor kicks it across the 6-yard box, where Eric Gates gets there first at the near post and finishes to give us the lead. And considering that most of the goal celebrations we've seen during this season were firm handshakes and, you know, a well done, it's fair to say the players enjoyed this one.
Yeah, especially right in front of the Newcastle fans as well.
Yeah, Gary Hours loved it, didn't he? He was I think he was almost in the 2 yards away from the fans, just you know, the fists going in the air and everything. It was brilliant. I mean, looking at the highlights, it's another game, 100 miles an hour. It's a derby and a cup tie all rolled up into one, and it's got that feeling that it's going to spill over at any minute. And there's a point in the first half where John Kay completely wipes out Billy Askew. And half of the stand on that touchline starts to spill out onto the pitch trying to get at John Kay. I don't know if anybody's seen that bit where the police all kind of crowd.
John Kay, isn't it?
Yeah. The interesting
I think John could have handled it.
Oh yeah, yeah. There was only a couple of thousand trying to spill on. There wasn't enough of them. I don't. But yeah, he completely wipes Billy Askew out, and then his reaction to the referee was, you know, I didn't touch him, ref. Thoughts, as we've seen all throughout the season. But yeah, going a goal up at half time. Second half is exactly the same. There's no let up in terms of the speed of the game. Chances at either end. Best was probably Mark Stimson making a last-ditch tackle to stop Gary Hours virtually on the goal line. Until 5 minutes left, where Warren Hawke finds Marco with a ball, and a great 1-2 between him and Eric Gates. And then he slides the ball past John Burridge to put us 2 up. It's probably fair to say, I mean, all of you, that this is one of the most famous goals in the club's history.
I'm just watching it over and over again now, actually, as we're speaking, and it's lovely, but it's very very much the kind of goal that Sunderland had been creating throughout the season, isn't it? With those give and goes, using Gates's vision and obviously Marco's pace and power and finishing. But I think a good amount of credit needs to go to Warren Hawke for obviously being a young kid and a cool head really on that left hand side in creating the opportunity, creating the space for the forward players to make that move. And obviously,
I think he justified his selection there and then, didn't he?
Absolutely, yes.
Still had the energy with 5 minutes left.
But it's interesting talking about Gates's vision, and he had all that, a great touch player, lovely ability to pick a pass, and Gabbiadini's pace. But this is the interesting thing in terms of an away performance. It was a good away performance, but Sunderland, funnily enough, I think you'd probably all agree with me, that side was not blessed with pace apart from Marco, and that was possibly both the strength and weakness of the Sunderland team. But Marco, pre-injury, when he was in this sort of form, he could be absolutely electric. And thank goodness he had the pace, because there wasn't a lot coming from anywhere else in the team. And that's been a problem for Sunderland teams almost as long as I can remember, a lack of pace. And thank goodness that Marco, at that point in his career, had it in spades, and that was fantastic. Yeah, great goal. I think probably the best derby performance by Sunderland at that point since the 1979 Gary Rowell derby on Tyneside.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting observation that about Marco's pace. Not like the team to some extent was kind of built around springing Marco, because as you say, he was such a good player. But when you look at the the previous season, when Marco decided to have a bit of a hot temper and chinned a couple of people and got 3 and 4 game bans, we struggled so badly without him, because there was just no other pace in the side.
Yeah, that's it.
And when you look at how the goals were shared about, I think I'm right in saying Marco was he the only player to get in double figures, or
it
was?
I think it was, yeah.
So for a team going up or having aspiration to only have one player in double figures is pretty incredible. But
I think I had a little look at the figures before we started talking. I think the next two highest scorers were midfielders, weren't they? Armstrong and Hours.
Gates, you obviously set Marco up here with their sort of traditional 1-2 give and go, and he got the first goal himself. But Gates hadn't had the most prolific season. He hadn't necessarily been a regular all season either. And I think when you kind of look back on Marco and Eric Gates's partnership, you tend to think it was, they were regulars together for week in, week out for 3 or 4 seasons, but they weren't really. But this goal is absolutely iconic. I remember the following Christmas, the Christmas card.
I got one of those.
What was this goal? And I framed it, and it was on our sideboard for years.
Very quickly, Bill, just because we're on that subject of Marco Gabbiadini. I mean, from your kind of position in the Nationals, I mean, did you ever get kind of whispers on whether there was any substance in what seemed like constant rumours he would move away from Sunderland at the time?
Oh, yes. I mean, it was a tricky one for Sunderland to manage. But there were, at that stage in Marco's career, constant whispers that there'd be a bid coming. And actually, when he eventually did move, I actually spent an evening with Marco in a hotel down in South London, Sutton, I think it was. I think he was staying in a hotel in Sutton ahead of his move to Palace, and he didn't really want to move, but I think he thought it was now or never at that point in his career, and it was a great shame that Sunderland did lose him. But to be honest, when you look back now with the benefit of hindsight, Sunderland had the best of him, I think, didn't they? And he was never quite the same player again.
It's probably fair to say, the potential we saw, he maybe didn't kind of fulfill that potential in a way from what we saw of him.
Well, injury had a massive impact on his pace and his productivity as a striker. That's the simple fact of the matter. Some players, when they get an injury, and ultimately this was the truth of Michael Owen, although Liverpool managed Michael Owen's injury for a number of years, but ultimately, if you're a player who depends on pace like Gabbiadini, and to an extent like Michael Owen. If you lose that, you're snookered, you're finished.
Yeah.
Well, one of the constant themes, I think, is how we had really exciting young players in this team. And we've mentioned Gabby Dean, but Hours and Armstrong, etc., and obviously Kieran Brady, who shone brightly early on, and then whose careers never quite reached the heights that that were expected of Hours and Gabby Dean in particular are always attracting attention from clubs slightly higher up the leagues, and that it seemed to be injuries that were the consistent in that equation, really.
Absolutely. The scourge of development of young players. It's desperate when a player is hampered like that, and that was certainly the case with Marco and others, and it has been the case, down the years since then. Probably all think of a favourite player or two that have looked like they were going to burn brightly, only to flicker out after a bad knock, and it's a great shame. But that, as they say, that is football.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, we did score that second goal, and the game did kick off again.
Essentially.
Very briefly, because it didn't happen kind of immediately. It kicked off again. There was a kind of about 10 seconds of action, and then the Newcastle fans come streaming onto the pitch, heading towards the Sunderland fans behind the opposite goal, but are met on the halfway line by a line of Northumbria Police's finest, and police horses and everything. And the players are. I don't think I've seen the likes of John McPhail move so quick, running off that pitch. I think Tony Norman probably did 100 metres in about 8 seconds flat to get off that pitch. And the players are back in the dressing room. And probably the coolest person at St James's Park was someone Bill's mentioned, the referee, George Courtney, who was selected by the FA to actually go to the World Cup in the summer.
Yeah.
And talking to a couple of the players, Gary Hours, we've had an interview with, and also Dennis Smith, he said the referee was straight in there and talked to the players and said essentially that don't worry about it. We'll be finished. If we have to wait all night, we're going to get this finished.
But now I've got some sympathy with Courtney's approach, and I think that was probably informed. I know I'm a bit older than most of you guys, but you probably remember or will have been told about the Newcastle-Nottingham Forest match of a couple of decades earlier than this. When I think it was a cup tie, and the Newcastle fans spilled onto the pitch in that match as well, and forced the match to be stopped. I think George Courtney probably had that episode in mind and thought, no, we're not. History is not going to repeat itself. We're going to get this game finished. But thank goodness he did. Yeah.
Well, it was a tried and tested spoiling tactic, really, wasn't it? At the time of the more disruptive elements of all clubs' fan bases, not just singling out Newcastle in this. This was a time of great trouble on the on the terraces and outside of grounds, and this was part of the issue, that
I wonder
it ended
if it was
up in.
also, I can't remember, you guys who were there would probably tell me, but would it also possibly have been partly due to the fact that post Hillsborough, those infamous, steel grey fences probably came down at
They've been taken down, yeah. Well, I can never remember football behind fences because this was like my first season. But so obviously that must have played a part in it, definitely. And they'd been obviously released from the cage in that sense. And were able to do it.
Literally.
And stewarding obviously wasn't at the same levels. They didn't have the same kind of protocols where, 5 minutes to go at the end of a crucial match. Now you've got, a team of stewards coming in line in the pitch facing the fans, ready to jump on it. And obviously I hadn't learned the lessons at that point about how to handle crowds who might want to disrupt play.
So, mind you, they had a lot more police in those days.
Aye.
Well, they needed it. Yeah. Well, so all the lads who didn't read Gordon McKeague's plea in the
yeah.
Well, the game, after 20 minutes, the game starts again. It's a kind of a bit of a farce when it finally calms down. It starts with a drop ball. But you can see the players have one eye on where they are on the pitch. as they're all getting ready to essentially sprint off the pitch as fast as their legs will take them, as the Newcastle fans are getting ready to breach the police lines and make a return to the pitch again. But it finishes 2-0. I mean, what a night in the history of Sunderland Football Club. I mean, one of the things I enjoy watching is the reaction in the tunnel in the highlights of the Sunderland players coming in, especially Eric Gates. He's absolutely loving it. But can you remember how you celebrated, Bill?
Yeah, I can't. I think actually I was in the office, and in those days in Fleet Street, and it still was then Fleet Street, we were allowed to have those of us who were editors, and we were allowed to have office fridges, which was stocked by the company with a few sherbets. And a few sherbets were downed in the office, and I raised my glass triumphantly in the direction of the A1 North.
Well, I mean, just on that, Bill, when you maybe raised a glass, were you raising a glass that we'd, of course, beaten Newcastle, or was it maybe slightly raising your glass that you thought we're promoted as well?
I wasn't taking that for granted. Obviously, the whispers were already starting ahead of what happened when the Football League made its pronouncement after the final. But there were already a few whispers that Swindon were in serious trouble. But no, I was just raising a glass, to be honest, that Sunderland were at Wembley and might get up, through their own volition, that they were had a good chance of getting promoted, and we'd stuck it up the old enemy as well.
Cool. I want to give a quick shout out, the little anecdote for my dad before we move on from the Newcastle match completely. In that he did attend this game, but in the Newcastle end.
Was he on the pitch?
No, he had to sit on his hands the entire time and not open his mouth, basically, and still goes on about how it's one of the most difficult things he's ever had to do in his entire life. I think somebody sorted him a ticket from his work at the time, and yeah, he did attend this. He did get to the game.
Did he have his scarf on under his coat?
I'm not sure. I think knowing my dad, he's a very risk averse kind of person. He probably went as neutral as possible and maybe modified his accent quite a little bit as well. It sounded a bit more Newcastle,
Red and white boxer shorts.
The closest I've come to that, I did exactly the same thing in the home end at Elland Road, a game against Leeds, and I couldn't talk because obviously you can't disguise your North East accent for a Yorkshire one. So yes, I had to sit on my hands when Jason McAteer scored for us, and then poke myself in the eye to pretend it really upset me. So
just a few A-ups and you'd have been all right.
Yeah, that's right.
I did the same at Villa Park under Paolo Di Canio when we got humped 6-1, and they all ended up laughing at me. They realised at the fifth that I wasn't there to support Aston Villa. Anyway, so I mean, let's kind of quickly move on and get on to the final. But just a quick mention: the day after our second leg was the FA Cup final replay, which we mentioned earlier. So isn't quite as explosive as the first one, but as Bill said, it is the game that sets up Alex Ferguson to arguably kind of dominate during the 1990s with Manchester United. A winning goal from left back Lee Martin, of all people, kind of a lesser known name in Manchester United's history, but probably scored the goal that set up a decade of domination. Now, in the other playoff semi-final, Swindon Town beat Blackburn Rovers 2-1 in both legs to win 4-2 on aggregate. Do you think at that point when they realised Swindon, was that panic stations to needing to get this sorted, Bill, at that point, or do you think they were happy to wait and to see what happened in the final?
Well, I think they knew they were in trouble. The chairman had gone at this point, Brian Hillier. He'd been banned from football. Another director, Gary Herbert, had taken over as chairman. He was going through the motions saying we're cooperating with the inquiry. We don't expect charges to be filed, but then of course they were filed, and the word in the game, and it was very tough for Swindon because they had a lovely old chap. Some of you might remember him. People used to refer to the FA Council and the Blazers, the FA Blazers, the old boys. Well, Swindon had one of these guys, a director called Lionel Smart, who I think at this point was in his 70s, and he was a prominent member of the FA. And, guys like that must have been horrified that they were involved in what was something that could potentially see them in serious trouble with the FA itself and the Football League. They knew they were in trouble. Sunderland were playing a straight bat about this. One or two, bits of gossip behind the scenes that were coming out of the club about, we hear they're in trouble, but Swindon certainly knew they were in trouble, and there was gossip within the game that whatever happened, in the days leading up to the playoff, and Swindon, if they won, might not go up. That it would be taken away from them. So if you take that into consideration, it makes actually what happened on the day and the way that Swindon played all the more remarkable, really.
But with all these whispers, I mean, did it kind of make the game a little bit of a farce? I mean, that it was actually going ahead with this hanging over it?
It's a good point. I don't think it was a farce. Their season had to play out. The season had to be completed if and done the proper way. And that was only fair on teams like Blackburn and Newcastle as well. So it had to be done. And I think, in fairness, Sunderland didn't go there thinking, well, it doesn't matter whether we turn up on the pitch. And Sunderland were definitely trying to win that day.
Yeah.
Might not have looked it the way the match was played out, but they had to win it. Swindon had to try and win it. And I have to say, hats off to Swindon. They outplayed us, didn't they? I mean, they were the better side. And at that point, the players, I'm sure, would have thought, we've got to try and get up. We've got to make them make a decision. We've got to try and win promotion. And you can't fault their attitude on the day.
Yeah. I mean, for the final at Wembley, first year these finals were at Wembley. 30,000 tickets were allocated for Swindon and Sunderland of the 80,000 capacity at the time at Wembley, and ticket prices were between £8 and £20. The club applied to the FA for more, and we eventually got 40,000. In terms of the players' preparation, they went off to Mallorca for 4 days, which apparently had been booked regardless of making the final. Even though there was a 12-day gap, it still sounds a bit of an odd preparation. But yeah, I mean, Local Report actually had an interview with Bob Murray, Bill, and he said, I'm not sure if he named who it was, or maybe it was someone from the FA, but he was told in no uncertain terms that we shouldn't get beat off Swindon Town. I mean,
what do you mean that we shouldn't get beat?
Basically because it would cause them a headache.
I see.
They would have a decision to make.
Yes.
So it was clear that Bob Murray had gotten some sort of indication from the FA that it was going to be a decision, because I think even though that they didn't know what that decision would be, they knew that the playoffs, Swindon winning the playoffs, would have that impact. But I was going to ask on this, I mean, what would have happened to the story? Would it have had as much emphasis, exposure, if Swindon had failed to win the playoffs?
Well, no, it wouldn't, would it? The fact that the initial decision was that Swindon would be punished by a double relegation from their new status post-match of a First Division club back down to the Third Division. That is a massive story, and what makes a story is that Wembley winners, all the glory, greatest day in the club's history. It certainly was from Swindon's point of view. They'd never been at that level, and you suddenly are relegated 2 divisions. Now, as we know, on appeal, that was commuted to 1 demotion back from the First Division, from whence they came, to the Second Division. So they ended up starting the next season as a Second Division club again. But had they lost and Sunderland been promoted, then it would still have been a great story. Presumably, Swindon would have been relegated to the 4th Division from the 2nd. It would still have been remarkable. But all the emotion of being Wembley winners and all the rest of it just gave it that little bit of extra pizzazz, didn't it? And it would certainly have devalued the story a little, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Wembley appearance, of course, and that means new suits. So all the players were measured up at Dewhurst, of course. in Sunderland. And also a little story. Bob Stokoe, who was now a scout with Newcastle, had declined the club's invitation to come to Wembley. He said he'd only been back once since 1974, which was the year after, as part of a TV panel, and he wanted to remember it as he did in 1973. So will not be there. Did you manage to get a ticket, Bill?
Yes, I did. And I almost wish I hadn't, in some respect. But I was being quizzed by my fellow journalists as much about the backstory as about the match. It is what it is. It's when I look back at this period, all the football emotion. Forget my story for a second. All the football emotion centres on the semi-final against Newcastle. The actual final at Wembley, I can't remember or imagine a more dominant 1-0 win.
Yeah.
Against they were just outplayed, weren't they, on the day? Which was, I don't know what it was. I really do hope, and I believe, but I really do hope that Sunderland weren't playing under the impression that it didn't matter what happened on the pitch. That would be terrible. I don't think they did. I think they tried to win the game. They just couldn't get the ball off Swindon that day. Swindon's pass and move game, which had started under Macari to an extent, when he first went in there, it was very much a direct. They played route one, but they developed a pass and move game, and Ardiles, when he went there, enhanced that. Very much 1-2 touch football, and Sunderland found it very difficult to get the ball off Swindon.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a couple of elements that went into that, because in the end, there was touch and goal, but Colin Pascoe had been out since April, and he came back in for Warren Hawke, which was probably slightly unlucky for Warren Hawke, considering how well he'd done at St James's Park. But the other thing was Colin Pascoe was essentially, he came in and he wasn't fully fit. And according to Brian McNally's report, he said that Sunderland essentially got it tactically wrong, where he tried to play Colin Pascoe behind Gates and Gabardini, which is odd considering that he wasn't fully fit, but that we'd never done that all season, and then suddenly we tried to do that in a game as big as this.
I think Swindon, like the system that Ardiles had implemented at Swindon, was really that sort of diamond midfield, wasn't it? So that somebody sat in front of the defence, two sort of central players in front, and then one player behind the striker. So maybe Dennis Smith was trying to copy that to
match them up
a little bit.
Yeah. Well, the other thing was Colin Calderwood's early tackle of Marco Gabardini, which basically put him out of the game. Yeah, he was limping around for the rest of the game after a typical. And as Dennis Smith put it, he was a tough centre half, and he said, well, he did the job for the manager, and that's what you do as a centre half. So he said, fair play to him. But yeah, I mean, we had your hero, Rich, in goal to thank, that it wasn't a cricket score that day, basically.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Tony Norman as ever.
One of his best performances in a Sunderland shirt, I think. Absolutely superb, Tony Norman, that day.
Yeah.
I think it could have been 7 or 8-0, couldn't it? Without.
Yeah, and he could do nothing about Swindon's goal. Deflected in off Gary Bennett, sent them the wrong way. And Gary Bennett said, when Swindon's goal went in, it was the worst moment of my career. I've got my sights set on playing at the highest level, and it's something I'll have to discuss with the manager. I would love to play in the first division, and I'm not getting any younger. I mean, just on this, I mean, obviously we know we did go in the end, and we'll come on to quickly that story. But do you think there would have been an exodus from the club, Bill, if we hadn't have gone up that year?
Yes, I mean, who could deny Gary Bennett those sentiments? Looking back, and you think it was a couple of years after that we had the 92 side that got to the FA Cup final. I think that the nucleus of the side was there in 1990, and there's no doubt that Dennis Smith improved the side, but he would have struggled to do that had they not gone up as a result of what happened to Swindon post-match. As I said before, I don't think it was a a very good Sunderland side. It was a capable side that was improving, and Dennis Smith and Viv Busby had done a great job, coming in after the shambles of the McMenemy years. But yeah, they would have struggled had they not won promotion. It's not new. It's not a new argument, but I think that maybe for that team, promotion to the First Division maybe came a year too soon. I don't know whether a few lads agree with that, but they were caught short. They were found to be a little wanting when they did go up, and that's a shame because, as I said, they were an improving side, but perhaps they needed to improve a little more than to go up. But of course, you never say no to promotion, do you?
Yeah.
You go up when you go up.
Well, we finished sixth for a reason that season, and we were, and as it became the argument following this game, we were a considerable way behind Swindon in terms of points. And clearly, from that game, we were a good way behind them in terms of the quality that we could show on the pitch. And yeah, it wasn't a natural promotion, really. Naturally, we would have stayed down, and we might not have had that quite obviously exciting, but ultimately disappointing season that we had the season after.
Well, just a little point there, Rich. We finished level on points with Swindon in the league, just behind them on.
Oh, of course we did. Sorry.
Finished well behind Newcastle, I think.
Get my league too. Yeah, sorry.
The two automatically promoted sides, so there was a big gulf between us and Leeds and Sheffield United who went up. But I think Billy, your point earlier, the question you raised about, you hope the Sun players didn't know about the possible, meaningless fixture. We have spoken to a few players throughout the podcasts that we've done, and nobody had any inkling that anything else would happen apart from the wins of this game would get promoted.
Yes.
And I think the talk, as we've said, Gary Bennett was questioning whether he wanted to stay because he wanted to play top flight football. And I think you fast forward to the season after, and we did fall short. But I actually always think we played that First Division season with the team that we would have played the next season with in the Second Division.
Yeah,
the signings that we made were from Second Division clubs.
No, that's true, and I think in the past, Bob say, or it's been reported that he said that he knew that it was almost certainly going to go against Swindon, and they might not go up. But it would have been madness for Bob or for Dennis Smith or Viv to transmit any of that feeling of Swindon being out on their backsides before the match. The players had to go into that game believing that they had to win to go up, and anything else would have been football suicide, wouldn't it?
I mean, well, we had to wait 17 days until the 14th of June for a meeting in London with the Football League Management Committee, which made the final decision. But I mean, in the meantime, during those 17 days, Newcastle was staking their claim. A spokesman from Newcastle was saying, whilst a number of clubs might think they have a strong case for taking Swindon's place, we believe there is none stronger than Newcastle United. And surprise, surprise, that a Newcastle MP tabled a motion in the House of Commons calling on Newcastle to be promoted in the First Division. So not much changes there. There was also a very tanned Ron Atkinson, who was manager of relegated Sheffield Wednesday. He was reporting for ITV in Italy for the World Cup, and he appeared on St. Greasy stating that nobody should go up and they should be reinstated to the First Division. But I mean, were their claims actually seriously being considered by the FA, Bill?
I think probably not, to be quite honest. Just as a quick aside, Ron, dear old Ron, when he was Manchester United's manager, and I was on the People in Manchester, I interviewed him in his office several times. And do you know what took pride of place in Ron's office at the Cliff? A sunbed. But anyway, that's another story. He would say that for Wednesday. Absolutely nothing to do with Sheffield Wednesday. It was all an issue about who would replace Swindon in terms of going up. And if Swindon weren't to go up, then you look at the league table, and Newcastle would have to make that claim, wouldn't they? But they'd been beaten as part of the regular run of fixtures by Sunderland. Yeah. The only team, logically, and you have to be an idiot to go past this logic, is the team that finished immediately behind Swindon, the way the regular season played out. if you include the playoffs in that regular season. And that was Sunderland. And Sunderland finished immediately behind Swindon. So Sunderland take their place. To me, it's as simple as that.
Do you think some of it we heard slightly earlier about the playoffs were new, a novel a novel part of football, particularly with a final played at Wembley, that there was just that hangover of that. I remember at the time people did still think it was unfair that the sixth place team would even have been with a shot of going up.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean that was evident in the comments in Gordon McKeague's programme notes that you mentioned. You know, we finished where we finished. They were third, weren't they, Newcastle? So it would be a hangover, but once you are then committed and everybody agrees that the league system is going to feature playoffs with third playing sixth and fourth playing fifth, that's it. You're committed to it. At that point, where you actually finish in the league then becomes irrelevant.
Yeah,
you're then in a mini competition to decide who wins promotion.
Yeah, that's a competition you sign up to in the first place, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, they did decide that Sunderland should take their place. And I just want to mention, very quick mention, because I think Tranmere Rovers were the ones who were really hard done by in all of this. Because they were actually promoted to Division 2 when Swindon were relegated to Division 3. But then on appeal, that got overturned. So Tranmere went back to Division 3 because they were celebrating promotion. That must have been awful. Anyway, Newcastle were also clearly disappointed with the decision, and Chairman Gordon McKeague was also a member of the management committee, and said he clearly, I'm bitterly disappointed, but the decision has been made. I accept it, and I wish our neighbours at Sunderland success next season. Although he refused to say whether he agreed with the committee's decision. Interestingly enough, one of the strangest promotions in the history of the Football League, probably. And I remember finding out on CFAX in the living room, and I was with my dad, and I found out he had CFAX on, and found out we'd be promoted. And without a pause, he turned around and said, "We'll only come straight back down."
That's bitter experience, isn't it?
Yeah. He'd seen it all before. I was over the moon saying, no, it'll never happen. Dennis Smith, he said he found out while he was shopping in the Metro Centre. So, I mean, any memories of how you found out how we actually got promoted?
For me,
were you actually at the FA when it happened?
I wasn't. I was actually on a break, a couple of days break, and I was in the West Country. I was in Bath, so not that far from Swindon, actually. And I was waiting with bated breath. Being on the Sunday paper, it wasn't that important for me to be actually at the meeting. If it had been on a daily. But I can just tell you that when I heard the news, I was absolutely euphoric, because from my point of view, I had a double celebration, didn't I? I had the celebration as a Sunderland fan that Sunderland had won promotion, but from a professional point of view, from my story, this was just like the cherry on top of the icing on a very big cake. That what had started as a phone call from what sounded like a sort of a busybody saying you got to go and have a look at what's going on at Swindon Town. So 18 months or so later, this incredible turn of events, and with the chairman facing a criminal trial, Macari facing a criminal trial, the club relegated 2 divisions, as we know, it was commuted to 1. And Sunderland, how could this possibly happen to me? My boyhood club is a accident of happenstance, and what happens, on the pitch, just combining to make this the most incredible story that I've ever been involved in. It was just utterly, gobsmacking, mind-blowing. Use whatever adjectives you like.
Well, we're now a Division 1 club ahead of the 1990-91 season, and within a week there are reports linking us to a move that would see the return of Ali McCoist. There's a story that brings John Byrne back to England from Le Havre in France to Sunderland, and we have apparently inquired on the availability of Steve Bould at Arsenal. Eric Gates and John McPhail have moved to Carlisle and Hartlepool, and it will surprise nobody that Bob Murray has made an early statement where he warns that there will be no £40 million spending spree, which is a conversation for another day. So on that bombshell, it just leaves me to say, Bill, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to speak to the only journalist in history who's got their side promoted.
Listen, fellas, it's been great listening to the crack and how far flung we are. It's been my pleasure to join you.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.